Hey everyone, welcome back to Medical Terminology. We are on week 8, so we're now doing the cardiovascular system. Oh. Okay, so real quick assignments, or announcements, sorry. So first announcement is assignments for this week. So we just have the crossword puzzle. Make sure you guys do that. I had some confusion about that. Make sure that you're hitting the check button because that submits it. So if you read the instructions, it says if you do not hit the check button, it will not submit. And if you exit out of it, it will delete all your work. So make sure you're doing that. If I remember right, it gives you 2 attempts. You can just look at the instructions for that though, because I believe it tells you how many attempts you get. Um, just on top of that, also we have the PHSA. That is a club that our department is trying to start up. And so what it is, it's for public health. It's the Public Health Student Association. So that's just for people going into healthcare who are wanting to network within the community. So mm, one of my friends, Aubrey, she's a fellow GA, teaching a few classes, and so she and I are talking. And so there's opportunities for scholarships, ways to build a resume, get opportunities to get experience within the field to make your applications um, more competitive for either nursing school or whatever program you're going into, as well as graduate programs. Um, this week as well, it's midterms, obviously, so make sure you're taking care of yourself. Um, it's really easy during midterms to not eat enough, to not sleep. But the biggest thing for having success during midterms is make sure you're sleeping enough so your brain can process the information, and make sure you're eating enough so that you're fueling your brain. Because as we remember from we talked about the nervous system recently, the brain runs on carbohydrates. And so if you're starving it, it doesn't function well. And then also just a quick tip for midterms. If you feel like you're going nowhere, I feel like you've been studying and it's not working, go for a 20-minute walk, go outside, take a breath, take that break and just kind of step back for a couple minutes. It does wonders. It really helps with retention. So highly recommend that so you guys can do well in your midterms this week. So to get started, first of all, just looking at the anatomy of the heart. So you have your various parts, obviously. So in blue is marked the veins, so that's bringing blood towards the heart. And then you have, or carrying deoxygenated blood in this one, but veins carry blood to the heart, and then arteries carry it away from the heart. So here we can see the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. So those are the two veins that everything goes into, and they drain directly into the heart. And you have your atria and your ventricle. So your atria are the top two chambers, and your ventricle are the bottom two larger chambers. So with anatomy of the heart, there's a lot of technical terms. It can be difficult, so make sure you have a diagram. The cool thing about the heart is that a lot of the medical terminology, a lot of the terms can be broken down so that it's easy to understand what's going on. Physiology of the heart, so it has several functions. Well, a couple functions. So first of all, it's meant to circulate blood, and so it feeds blood and nutrients to everywhere else. So the blood will pick up nutrients near the digestive tract, and then picks up oxygen in the respiratory system, and the heart transports the blood everywhere else. It's the pump that moves it all. So the heart also requires its own blood system. So if you look back at the previous picture, you can go back in the video, you'll see that with the ascending aorta, there is actually the coronary arteries and blood vessels. And so what those do is those actually go around the heart and they feed the various parts of the heart with blood, its own blood supply. So the heart needs blood. If you don't, that's actually how you get heart attacks. It's because it's a cutoff of the circulation to the heart tissue. So cardiovascular system, it ties in pretty heavily with the respiratory system. That's why we say cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory, just because Those two work very much together. And then the last thing with the heart is that it's heavily reliant on electricity. Um, it's governed by electrical function. So, okay. So circulation and firing. So, um, when you get the blood supply, everything drains in from the vena cava, both inferior and superior. And so everything drains into the right atria. And so it then goes down to everything fills into atria, it contracts, it goes down into the right ventricle, which then shoots it over to the lungs. And so in the lungs, it becomes oxygenated. It's returned by the pulmonary vein back to the heart, and then it goes from the uh, left atria to the right or left ventricle, excuse me, and then the left ventricle pumps it into the aorta, where it's then dispersed into the rest of the body. Those of you that take anatomy class later on, you'll find that there's a lot of blood vessels that come off that aorta pretty quick. So, firing of electricity. So, um, up on the top part of the heart, in between the two atria, you have what's called the sinoatrial node. And so, what that does is it's the first firing node. And so, it fires an electrical signal, which then travels through some conduction fibers to the atrioventricular node. When the atrioventricular node fires, it then goes through the the bundle of His, both the left and right ones, which then go into the Purkinje fibers, which trigger all the contractile cells in the heart to contract. So you kind of get a diagonal pattern starting at the top, going from top right to bottom left, and that's how you get contraction. And so with this, everything fires in order. If things don't fire in order, it's not as efficient, and you actually get what's called PVC, and it doesn't move blood as well. And so people that have lots of PVCs or whose hearts aren't firing quite correctly, they'll get fatigued easily, and their body isn't working as efficiently due to that lack of blood supply. So blood still does move when that happens, but not as effectively. So conditions that you'll see with the heart. So kind of the main ones we see. So I'll start with the bottom one actually. So we see anatomical problems. So that's defects, or that's congenital heart defects, or that can be things that happen due to injury or something like that. Then you have electrical problems. We'll talk in a second about the different cell types, but you have what are called nodal cells, and sometimes you can have them in just the wrong place, or the conduction doesn't conduct right, or the electricity just goes to the wrong place due to a structural problem. And so that can cause problems as well. Um, I've known a few people where they had nodal cells in the wrong place, and so it actually can cause what's called ventricular bigeminy, where they have a PVC every other beat, um, which isn't fun. And the last one is adaptations or lifestyle things. So you can see that actually in two ways. So lifestyle, um, that can be like your myocardial infarctions due to dietary habits or lifestyle habits. Myocardial infarctions is just the medical term for heart attacks. And that's just a blocking of the coronary arteries so that the heart isn't receiving its own blood supply. And so when that happens, you'll see necrosis of the tissue where it dies, and then it just doesn't function as well. And then you also see adaptations. So sometimes after a heart attack, you'll see that the heart kind of adapts, or it kind of um, compensates for that issue. And so with that, you'll see some interesting stuff with the EKGs. It's actually pretty cool. I won't go super in depth in that just because of time. And then also you'll see adaptations due to like exercise or something else. So for example, in endurance athletes, so I'm actually an example of this, you have a enlargement of the left ventricle, which is pretty normal for them. And so what that is it allows our bodies to actually move a larger volume of blood. And so you'll see an enlargement of the left ventricle. So if you are ever in cardiology and you see someone with an enlarged left ventricle, ask them about their lifestyle. Hey, do you bike a lot? Do you run a lot? Triathlons or whatever? Because more often than not, if they're an athlete, they're going to have a large left ventricle. And another thing that can happen also is with power athletes, so like power lifters, sprinters, those types of power athletes, you'll actually see a thickening of the walls of the heart. And so that actually increases its ability to contract and produce more force, which helps them in their competition. So, not all conditions are bad. Some are just adaptations that the heart makes to better suit your lifestyle. And then if you stop exercising or stop doing whatever, usually it'll eventually go back. Okay, cell types. So there's three types of cells with cardiac tissue. So you have your nodal cells, your conduction cells, your contractile cells. So your nodal cells are in your sinoatrial node and your atrioventricular node. And so what it does is it's where the electrical signal starts. And so it starts at the node and then it goes through your conduction cells, which are, think of it as just wiring. And then you have your contractile cells, which contract and kind of squeeze the heart. So the cool thing about the heart is it's self-sufficient. I had a professor who was doing into a lot of the cardiology stuff. So they had animal heart that they were they trying to remember what it was. Basically, they had a heart that was pretty fresh from an animal, and so they were able to, because he was in animal sciences, and they were able to cut it up, and the contraction still happened even when it was in pieces. So the tissue was actually like quivering in his hand, and so the heart is meant um, to continue contracting, continue beating, even if it's not getting feedback and signals from the rest of the nervous system. And that's kind of just a backup safety thing. Obviously, it doesn't last forever. Um, and eventually stuff happens and you'll get necrosis of the tissue if it's cut off for too long, but it's meant to have backups in place. Okay. Um, Last thing, so just understanding anatomy and conditions. So a lot of the cardiovascular stuff, the terms can be broken down. They can be better understood by understanding medical terminology. So if you ever work in cardiology, you ever work in a hospital, um, even if you've never heard of, for example, pericarditis, by understanding medical terminology, you can know immediately, okay, pericardium is the tissue out that surrounds the heart. Um, and so itis means inflammation. Okay, so they have something going on where it's an inflammation of the pericardium. And so understanding medical terminology means that you don't have to learn every single term, but you're able to hear a word, quickly break it down in your head and say, okay, I know what that means, or I have a general understanding. And so it's a very useful skill. So make sure you guys are studying, make sure you guys are taking the time to practice this. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me, or you can always set up Zoom hours with me. Okay, have a great week. Good luck with midterms. You guys got this.